Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our event today. I'm Jordan Chitley, editor of Globe Drive at the Globe and Mail. Before we start the formal part of our program, we have a presentation and demo from one of our event sponsors. So Shiva and team, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome everybody and good afternoon. Today we have something very exciting to talk about, powering the future of transportation with AI. We live in unprecedented times where we have supply chain shortages, getting access to new vehicles is quite difficult, driving up the price of used vehicles. This is all happening while we're transitioning to electrification and connectivity, which really is going to proliferate the future of AI within transportation. And today we're going to talk about a project that's been worked on over the past 2 years with the company Pitstop, Fleet Complete, and MPL. And this project was focused on deploying AI into fleets of today to help drive as much uptime as possible through predictive maintenance and predictive analytics. Let me quickly introduce you to some of the members on our team. We have Frank. So Frank, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Frank Friesacker. I'm the Chief Product Officer with Fleet Complete, based in Toronto. We've been helping fleets around the world for 20 years optimize their operations, their maintenance, and their safety. So I'm looking forward to talking more with Shiva today.
Awesome. We have myself. My name is Shiva Bardwaj. I'm the founder and CEO of Pitstop. We are a predictive analytics company in this transportation ecosystem. And then we have Paul. Paul, please introduce yourself and MPL.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Lagerworth. I'm the fleet director with NPL Canada. So I've been in the auto and truck and equipment business almost my whole career, starting at about 18 years old as an apprentice mechanic and getting my license status a few years later and working in various garages until about 2001. From there, I had a pretty successful sales career in heavy trucks with Freightliner International till about 2007. Since then, I've been managing fleets, first with a major highway maintenance contractor and now with NPL Canada, a leading pipeline construction company in Canada. So NPL Canada is now managing roughly about 1,000 assets, everything from trucks to cars to large excavation equipment and specialized pipeline equipment. We've been in the business for about 25 years, and we pride ourselves really on our alliance approach to our business partnerships. So happy to be here today. Thanks, Sheila.
Awesome. Great, Paul. So about 2 years ago, the genesis of this work was between Fleet Complete, a very large telematics company in the space, and Frank's going to talk a little bit more about that, and myself at Pitstop, where we really wanted to take these large data sets that vehicles are already generating on the road and apply predictive analytics to identify things like brake, battery, engine failures ahead of time, and ultimately see how that can actually help a fleet like an MPL, like Paul at MPL, drive more uptime and run a more efficient business. So maybe Frank, it would be great to introduce and talk about Fleet Complete and where the company's at today, and then we can dive into the actual project that we deployed and the value prop of it.
Thanks, Shiva. So Fleet Complete, we've been around over 20 years now, and we have about 700,000 vehicles that we gather data from every day. And we gather that many parts of the world, primarily in America. And what we provide is insights using this data for fleet managers, for maintenance managers, safety officers, compliance officers, and all the other stakeholders, including the drivers of these trucks, to make their days that much more effective, but also make it more convenient, whether it's hours of service, etc. But I think what we're talking about today is really centered around the work we've done in providing insights into predictive maintenance, which then helps our fleet customers avoid unscheduled downtime, allows them to plan their utilization and windows to be much more effective. And I think you have to keep in mind this data is streaming in 24/7 every day. And it's impossible for humans to keep an eye on all the data coming in through AI, through the algorithms that Pitstop's developed. We can constantly watching that data, looking at trends, and looking at comparative data from other vehicles in similar applications, and extract meaningful insights, and then use the software, our platform, to notify the right people at the right time so they can do something before it becomes more critical or more expensive to their operations. So it's been 2 years of working together to really harvest this data and develop the insights that Pitstop brings to the table.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, and so with all this data, where we're talking about, every few seconds, information like GPS, acceleration, various engine parameters being pushed into the cloud, what we were trying to do at Pitstop was bring forth a focus around analytics. So can we build models that can look for patterns that trend toward, let's say, brake wear or battery failures, and drive an indication early enough in the cycle. And at Pitstop, we've trained our algorithms on over 3 billion data points and growing by about 800% every quarter. For the improvement of reliability and accuracy is growing constantly. And as we move towards 5G and electrification, these trends will only continue, and the accuracy and intelligence behind these types of algorithms will become table stakes, and every vehicle will be expected to come out with this kind of feature set. And that's what's exciting here, because we're laying the groundwork, and we're doing it in a way that creates value for customers today, specifically with fleets. So if we look at the specific deployment of what we've been able to achieve, it's detect when the brake's going to wear on a vehicle ahead of time to get ahead of safety issues, understand when different sensors and systems in the vehicle are going to fail ahead of time, such as looking at turbo issues and turbo leaks, and doing this all through software and data analytics. And then also just prioritizing which vehicles in the fleet of 1,000 need to go in for service now versus later. And I think these are very important value propositions that help customers today benefit from AI. And that also creates the groundwork that will enable us to build future solutions to bring predictive maintenance to the masses. That's really, really what's quite exciting here. And by having Paul and NPL involved in this project, really got a real world input and insight as to what it is that the customers need in the field in order to be successful. So it's not just about saying drop everything you're doing and go change your battery, but rather sending an alert early on in the cycle to the right manager who can organize the vehicle going in for service around the existing schedule they might have for work. And that's really important, planned downtime versus unplanned. So we're going to show you a quick demo of the platform and implementation that we were able to perform, and talk a little bit more about it from there.
Welcome to Pitstop, powerful AI for the future of mobility. Let me introduce you to Paul, a fleet manager at NPL, a large utility contractor that makes sure homes and offices are always heated. Paul manages a fleet of 1,000 vehicles that are used by employees to get out to a job site, drill into the ground, and carry large equipment around. Making sure these vehicles are up and running efficiently is a key priority to the success of NPL's business. When Paul logs into Pitstop, he gets a real-time view of the vehicles in his fleet with the highest risk of having an issue. All vehicles are automatically prioritized by the Pitstop algorithms, which has learned about what types of issues cause the most downtime from analyzing thousands of vehicles. Paul can also instantly access an aggregated report showing the total downtime his fleet has dealt with. This acts as a guide for him to optimize his spending and doubles as a report to show management that his team is doing a great job. With the click of a button, Paul can deep dive into a specific vehicle and even a route that it has driven on. Data, which includes hundreds of sensors reporting temperature, pressures, and voltages, are running through the Pitstop AI engine, which provides real-time insights. Viewing the prediction algorithms that are running in real time is easy. Paul can see the most recent analysis around battery, brakes, and anomalies for this specific vehicle. This empowers him to make quick decisions about bringing the vehicle in for service or letting the driver continue to drive. By accessing real-time maintenance insights, Paul can save thousands of dollars while making the job easier. Reach out to us at info@pitstopconnect.com if you're interested in applying AI to your fleet.
Awesome. So quickly, we'll hear from Paul some of his thoughts on this project, and I think end it from there. Paul, do you want to just give a quick overview?
Sure, sounds great. Thanks for the opportunity here, Shiva. So, yeah, data collection through GPS tracking is giving us real-world, real-time information for many years now, and it's given us the ability to constantly analyze our fleet operations, which helps us better understand where to focus our efforts. Focusing on things like reducing idle hours, speeding, harsh events, fuel usage, and so on really helps us to better estimate asset life cycles and maintenance costs. It's also allowed us to see where we can move equipment and vehicles from areas of high use to areas of low use to better balance the fleet and maximize the useful life of the asset. A predictive maintenance solution could take these principles several steps farther, in my view. Predicting when assets need maintenance would be a game changer for fleet managers who are constantly looking for ways to use technology to drive cost savings and increase uptime. We're always watching and right-sizing the fleet in efforts to provide an appropriate amount of assets to work with. Knowing when assets would be down for maintenance and for how long will help fleet managers provide a consistent amount of fleet for the company to work with. With predictive maintenance, we can start to look more accurately at the maintenance required and can begin to plan downtime more accurately. Too often, vehicle and equipment maintenance is performed with the understanding that, well, the unit is down already, so we might as well do it now. I feel these types of maintenance activities can be wasteful. Parts and fluids are replaced simply because the unit is in the shop and we're trying to take advantage of downtime. We spend unnecessarily thinking we're doing the right thing, but we're giving up valuable remaining life in those parts and fluids. Most components have estimated and engineered lives, and we're replacing them before their useful life has been realized, thereby costing extra money. Conversely, it also happens that these components are stretched beyond their service life and increasing the risk of breakdown, further exacerbating the overall issue of downtime. So it would be far better if we could use the data to plan for maintenance, maximizing the service of those maintenance items, and then start grouping maintenance activities together based on mileage, hours, and conditions. We need to understand what service life to expect from brakes and tires, starters, belts, hoses, etc., all by studying data coming from the assets, working in varying situations and conditions. So NPL Canada is no different than any other large fleet these days. We're driven to consider our environmental impact, our safety, and compliance when managing the fleet. Our clients demand it of us. So predictive maintenance would bolster all of these efforts. Increase safety from timely maintenance and repair and maintenance tracking to satisfy any compliance requirements that we might have. Shiva, I really appreciate you having me today. So back over to you to close it off.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that's what we wanted to talk through, is just showcase how AI can be used today in fleets and vehicles on the road, and that this kind of technology will be introduced into all vehicles in the coming years. So thank you all for joining in and listening into the presentation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Shiva and team. For those of you just joining our event now, I'm Jordan Chitley, editor of Globe Drive with the Globe and Mail. And this is a really exciting time to be an editor of this section. We're at what I see as an inflection point in the auto industry. After more than a decade of tiptoeing towards electrification, automakers have been taking big steps in the past few years, setting up a situation where many consumers are now considering an EV or hybrid for their next car. Alongside this comes government mandates and incentives, infrastructure challenges, and marketing hype. It is our job, as I see it, at Globe Drive to help readers make sense of all this change and highlight the successes and hurdles along the way. And electrification isn't the only big tech trend. Autonomous technology is advancing at a rapid pace, but we are still a long way away from sitting back and reading a book while the car drives us. But what is changing now, and sales figures show it, is Canadians' increasing demand for larger vehicles. But how does that square with the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? We're going to get into all that, plus a lot more through discussions during this event. So we have a very exciting afternoon planned, but I'm going to start off now with a conversation about vehicle inventory and then hand off to other Globe Drive writers to moderate upcoming sessions. On that, On that topic of vehicle inventory, I'd like to introduce Yolanda Biswa, a Senior Vice President and General Manager with Canadian Black Book. Yolanda has been in the auto industry for more than 15 years, moving to Canadian Black Book from Auto Trader. Yolanda knows a lot about used car prices, where they've been and where they're going. So thank you for joining us. And let's jump in with questions.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I want to start off with a bit of a broad picture. Just generally the state of the supply chain, where it is now, how it's affecting used car prices. Just if you can, just paint us a picture of what this looks like at the dealer level.
Sure. Great question, Jordan. I can tell you definitely what's happening in the industry. Supply is very low, and as a result, vehicle values and vehicle price is at an all-time high and expected to be above 2019 prices and continue up until 2025. We are seeing inventory levels shift between franchise and independent dealers right now, and this is due to increased competition to acquire used vehicle inventory. This has resulted in independent dealers taking a larger share of the active listings when we compare year over year retail listings numbers from 2019 to current. Canadian dealers are also competing with U.S. wholesalers who acquire Canadian vehicles. The last stats we received a few months ago, the percentage of vehicles going to the U.S. was trended around 50% and higher from pre-pandemic levels. So a lot's definitely going on in the market and affecting our Canadian dealers. Inventory and lack of inventory is definitely the number one topic.
So can you give us like what is the year over year trend in regards to used car listings? Like how much was it? Can you give us an average dollar figure for how much more used cars cost now than they did, let's say, 2 years ago before the pandemic?
Sure. So I actually did a comparison specifically for this call. So 2 years ago, when we did an average, and you're taking an average of all cars listed, it was around 24,000. And currently, when I looked at the data just as of yesterday, it's 35,000 on an average we're seeing vehicles on the retail market right now.
That seems like an incredible rise. I think I was looking at a chart recently, and it almost looked like a cliff. Just how quickly used car prices have been rising over the past couple of years.
Correct.
Is this all just because supply and demand was completely thrown out of whack during the pandemic, with everything having to shut down and everything having to restart, and there being a chip shortage, or are there other factors at play?
I thought about this many times, and again, this is a great question. All roads lead back to the pandemic. The automotive supply chain has been heavily impacted by this chip shortage and production delays, which resulted because of the pandemic. We saw after the first lockdown, when people were able to go back into dealerships, we saw a huge pent up demand. Customers going into dealers to purchase cars. I was one of those people who purchased a new car. But also at that time, automotive manufacturers experienced production delays because of the lack of chips. So, really, when you look at this picture overall, this is all due to the pandemic. And we still don't know what the recent interruptions that we've had on production, how that's going to impact production as we go forward in 2022 to 2025.
Are there any clues for when this may be resolved? We've spoken to OEMs and other experts, and sure, they have sort of said toward the end of 2022. But what are you seeing?
We are seeing new car inventory being normalized in the second half of 2023. And due to the loss of new vehicle sales in 2020 to the current, we see used supplies being down until 2025. And again, I have to mention this again. The recent disruption to production being shut down is also another factor that will affect supply as we move forward.
So even when new cars, so even if new car production comes back towards the end of 2022, how long do you think it'll take for all of this pent up demand to really be satisfied?
Well, I think, you have to really, when you think of pent up demand, and we have a lot of conversations about this at our, within our office. There will definitely be pent up demand, but is that pent up demand going to be impacted by interest rates, by inflation? Are these things going to impact, how consumers move forward in the next couple of years? That's definitely something that we're looking at and we're trying to predict going forward. Sorry, my light went off and it just kind of threw me off. Yeah.
That's all right. I'm going to switch gears slightly from, I guess it's still sort of related to the pandemic, but fuel prices have risen significantly lately. Like I filled up my car just at the end of last week, and it is more money than I have ever put into my car before. How do you think this is going to affect buying trends?
I think this, in the past, when we saw fuel prices go up, we saw consumers gravitate to more fuel efficient cars. With the aggressive growth of EVs over the next few months and over the next few years, this may be a perfect scenario that pushes consumers to consider purchasing an EV. With multiple new choices of models that are coming to the market, new players, we think that this will propel EV sales going forward. We are doing a market research right now. It's Canadian Black Book doing annual market research and Ipsos poll research. And this is one of the questions that we're asking. How are consumers going to plan their next purchasing? Will the impact of high fuel prices impact whether or not they purchase an EV? I think this is one of the most important questions we're faced with right now.
Do you have any early results that you can share with us?
So we haven't got the results as yet, but as soon as we do, I will absolutely make sure we share it with you.
Great. You mentioned something earlier on about, I guess, used vehicles in the U.S. What is the impact of having the Canadian market be so close to the U.S. and it being so easy to transport vehicles across the border?
Sure. The U.S. vehicle market is significantly down more than Canada. New vehicle supply is down by 70%. And as a result, we are seeing more and more used vehicles being scooped up by known U.S. wholesalers because the profits are much more bigger south of the border. This adds to the lower inventory levels that we are experiencing here in Canada. I've recently done a lot of driving, within Southern Ontario. And as you move closer to the border, you see a lot of independent dealers that has a lot of inventory on their lots. And a lot of it is going to be moved across the border. Just by talking to dealers in and around Ontario, that's what we're hearing. And I think that this will continue to impact us, for 2022 and 2023.
So if I can just ask a very consumer focused question.
Sure.
If this sounds like right now it's one of the most challenging times to buy a used car, but let's say you own a car, particularly if you're leasing a car, and that lease is due. Is this the best time to buy that car off the lease and try to resell it?
So I'm in a second year into my 48-month lease. So exactly the question that I am currently contemplating. I think this is a great time. Consumers are becoming more and more knowledgeable about the value of their car. Because as you are aware, a lot of media attention has been placed on used car values, and I think consumers are becoming more and more educated. So. For myself, this is something that I'm currently, challenged with. Should I pay out my lease and sell my car privately and purchase a new car, I think that we're going to see consumers thinking out of the box. Normally, than when they would typically go into a dealership and trade in a car, they may be thinking, this is an opportunity for them to upsell into a car of their choice, like a luxury car, because their car is currently in equity. Their lease is in equity. So, it is definitely something I think that we need to watch going forward. Yeah.
But I guess on the flip side, if your lease ends and you buy it out and you sell it, and you make this profit, you still, unless you decide that you're going to bike or take the bus from now on, you still have to buy a car somewhere. So I'm guessing that might be a problem.
Because there's no supply, exactly. So that's the challenge I have right now, because I know that there is no new car supply. So I'm trying to gauge that timing, figure out what the right timing is. As I read early articles, talk to our OEM clients, and gauge when we'll see an inventory shift of more new cars coming to the market. And I think the average consumer is not as aware of the lack of inventory as we who are in the auto industry is. I think they find that they get more educated when they go to dealers, they hear more about it. And I know that just from my own household. I just had a son who bought a new car about 3 months ago, and was not quite aware of the inventory issue. So I think that this is something that we will definitely see shift as we move forward.
What do you think consumers can do if they are looking for a new car? Like what advice would you have for them now, given such a lack of supply?
I would say do research. Really research in the kind of car that you would like to purchase. There's lots of great information out there. I actually, read a lot of articles we do internally on from Global Mail. And I think this is a time to really educate yourself. And there's so many multiple features that are coming out. There are also lots of different EVs that are coming out. I think consumers are still trying to educate themselves on EV. And I think this is a good time to educate yourself. Also, go into your local dealer and talk to them. I frequent lots of dealerships personally and have great conversations. This is a really good time to do that.
And just on the flip side, on the dealer side, what are they saying about things they're doing? Are they doing anything to try to smooth out this, this issue of supply?
I think this is the dealers that I've spoken to. This is a great time for advanced customer service. This is the time for grassroots customer service where, when someone comes into your dealer, if you don't have the supply there, you educate them on inventory, educate them on the type of model they're looking for, and you can do a pre-order. I think this is a great time to build relationship with consumers because, as you know, the car buying, the purchasing process in a dealership is always somewhat scary for consumers. And this is really a great time to educate and make people comfortable about their purchase.
I've heard some stories at the dealer level about dealers trying to get used cars back and basically buying them back for almost the exact same price that they were sold for 2 years ago. Is that something that's still happening and that we can expect to happen?
Yeah, we've heard the same thing as well, and we expect that to happen because there is an inventory issue, and dealers are trying to get inventory on their lots, and as a result, they're competing in cases for that one trade-in or one specific car that somebody's trying to sell. So yeah, they are doing that, and I think that they will continue to do that until we see a shift in inventory.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. Is there anything that I forgot to ask that I should be asking, or anything that you want to add on this topic? I know you're really the expert when it comes to these used car prices, and I think a lot of us are just shocked in how much they've risen in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I think we all are as well. There's very shocked. And this is a question we get on a daily basis, Canadian Black Book, in regards to pricing, and either it's too high or too low. But one of the things that I'd like to add is that, as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of doing our annual market research, and we have focused in two specific areas in the market research questions. One is on EVs, and the other is on digital retailing. We are really interested to see how consumers, how buying habits will change for EV cars, and also how they will respond and embrace digital retailing. Once we have the results, I will be happy to share that with you.
I'm looking forward to seeing what the results are on that. Lastly, like you had mentioned, like 24,000 to 35,000 is a big jump. Do you see used car prices going down, or the trend of them increasing so rapidly is going to stop? Like, do you think that at some point prices will come back down to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, not to pre-pandemic level. We see prices softening, and we're seeing this already happening south of the border. We've already seen a little softening in the market. We don't see prices coming down to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon, because there is going to be a shortage of used cars, because we haven't had any new cars in the market for the last 2 years. So we see this continuing to 2025.
That was all very interesting. We are going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much, Yolanda.
Thank you for your time, and I'm sorry my light went out. It's called trying to save an electricity, which is great, but I didn't realize it was going to go out. Sorry about
that. Yes, that was a very interesting discussion, so thank you very much. Now I'm going to hand it off to Petrina Gentili to moderate the next discussion today.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm Petrina, as Jordan mentioned, and I'm a contributing writer for Globe Drive. I've actually been writing for the section since 2003, and I also report regularly on the automotive beat for CHCH-TV, CTV News Channel, BNN Bloomberg, and CP24. I'm thrilled to be your moderator for the next session, and it's called The Future of the Internal Combustion Engine. How will Canada make the shift? You might recall last July, the federal government announced plans to ban the sale of new gasoline and diesel engines by 2035. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll explore the trajectory for internal combustion engines, the evolution of electric, and the investments, plans, and approaches required for the transition to cleaner vehicles. We have a great panel of experts today to tackle those issues and more. And we'll save the last 10 minutes for your questions. Please join the discussion, and you can do so by clicking the questions box at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started by introducing our panelists. First, we have Stephen Beattie. He's the Vice President of Corporate at Toyota Canada, a company that will introduce their first all-electric vehicle, the BZ4X SUV, in Canada shortly. Our next panelist is Kara Clairman. She's a former environmental lawyer who spent a decade working at Ontario Power Generation. And now she's the founder, president, and CEO of Plug and Drive. It's a nonprofit focused on accelerating the adoption of EVs through education and outreach. Next up is Shiva Bardwa. He's the founder and CEO of Pitstop. It's a predictive maintenance platform for the auto industry that's designed to save costs, reduce downtime and recalls, and increase safety. And last but not least is Brian Kingston. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. It represents Canada's leading manufacturers, Ford, GM, and Stellantis. Welcome, everyone. I want to jump right into the discussion because I know this time is going to go fast. So, Stephen, I'm going to start off with you. How realistic is this 2035 target?
So Petrina, I guess it depends on what you think the target actually is. A lot of people have been throwing around this notion that as of 2035, there'll be no internal combustion engines in the marketplace, but that's not specifically true. What the federal government has announced is that by 2035, you're going to have to sell 100% zero-emission vehicles. And zero-emission vehicles include both fully electric vehicles like battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electrics. They also include plug-in hybrids. But there's something else that is developing at the same time, and that is the move toward e-fuels of one sort or another. So I'm not sure that the obituaries for the internal combustion engine are necessarily true. What is very clear is that governments and industry alike are trying to get to a point where we decarbonize the emission streams from vehicles, and that will happen, and it will happen very, very quickly.
Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Stephen. I think the decarbonization will happen quickly. And I think EVs, because they're, sort of ready now, ready for adoption. There's, more than 50 makes and models in the Canadian market today. And as of, I would say, maybe a year and a half from now, let's say end of 2023, over 100 makes and models in the Canadian market. There's really no reason to wait. I think it could happen faster than people expect, especially with these high gas prices and with electricity prices actually staying flat or going down. If you're paying $1.40 to $1.50 a liter, I'm paying the equivalent of about 25 to 27 cents. And I think when people really catch on to that, there's no stopping it.
But when you look at how Canada compares to other countries, I mean, look at Norway. Norway's target is 2025 to stop selling gas-powered vehicles with internal combustion engines, and they're pretty much on target. I think last month alone, 84% of new car sales in January were all electric, with 19 of the 20 top vehicles coming with a cable. Brian, what can Canada learn from Norway?
Yeah, great question. Norway is a leader because they've been on this for years. This has been a very conscious set of policies that have been put in place to try and effectively tilt the purchasing decision in favor of an EV. So that means addressing all the very well-known barriers to EVs that we see in Canada and other jurisdictions. The first is price. So that's always something that we hear consumers raising. They're concerned about the higher price of an EV compared to an ICE vehicle. The second relates to charging infrastructure. And the third really comes down to education. What Norway's done is they've reduced the price gap between EVs and ICE vehicles. They've built a huge amount of charging infrastructure. They've put in place incentives such as free access to high occupancy lanes on highways, free parking in city centers, and obviously because it's such a firm government commitment, there's a huge amount of communication and education that goes on. So it's a full court press, and I think Norway is a great example. There are other countries that Canada should be looking towards if we want to hit our targets and accelerate adoption.
Now, Shiva, what technology innovations do you think we need to help facilitate or speed up that target of 2035?
Yeah, I think one important factor about electrification is the fact that these platforms come with deep connectivity, so data flowing from the vehicle to the cloud, but as well as from the charging infrastructure. And then you have data from the utility companies. So bringing these ecosystems together where a vehicle knows where it can go to actually get charged, how the prices change and vary over time, getting people to not charge at certain times as well to manage demand and load. These are all important aspects for the grid not to get overloaded while infrastructure continues to get built, because infrastructure takes time. And I think that's where in Norway, what you're seeing is they spent the energy up front to really invest in renewable energy and that infrastructure required to supply and meet the demand. And I think the US is pushing forward with their infrastructure build with that kind of mindset. If you have the right infrastructure in place, then you'll be able to be successful with this transition. And then you'll have these different elements of the ecosystem talk to each other. So it'll be a seamless experience and seamless integration. And I think that's going to be very important to make that transition.
But how can they actually meet this target when they even haven't hashed out the proposed US legislation on American-made EV tax rebates? Stephen, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I feel like I want to weigh in on a few things here. One of which is the Norway example, which is maybe the most hypocritical example of the switch to zero emission, which is you fund the zero emission shift in your own country by peddling North Sea oil to everybody else. But leaving all of that aside, I think you have to really look at the question of what drives consumer demand. And it comes down to issues of disposable income. It comes down to issues of accessibility to certain types of technology. It comes down to having a form factor of vehicle that is right for your life stage or lifestyle. In other words, if you have a large family, you're not going to put people into a two-seater vehicle. So it's really important that as we move forward, there's a very diverse supply of different types of vehicles in the market, all of which deliver lower emissions. And then consumers are in a position to be able to pick and choose. But even in EVs, until quite recently, there were quite a few models in the marketplace. They all tended to be smaller vehicles, largely car based, and they were out of sync with where the consumer marketplace was headed. So you need public policy that's aligned with product development cycles, that's aligned with proper energy pricing strategies, and you need to send the right signals in the marketplace. So, for example, rising gas prices don't necessarily result in changing consumer practices. We've seen spikes in the past that had very short-term effects in the marketplace. What consumers need to believe, if they're going to make those shifts on the longer term, is that energy prices are going to continue to climb. And I think that's a reasonable bet on oil and gas. I think there is an argument to be made that electricity prices are going to go up too, and the cost of charging your electric car is going to change quite dramatically as the as the electrified fleet starts to look more like the conventional fleet. In other words, not being charged overnight anymore, but using convenience charging and having to rely on much higher capacity charging systems. So it's all of those things have to get a lucky bounce in order to get to 2035. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a bad bet to think that government policies alone are going to be able to get you where you need to be. You've got to have everybody pulling in the same direction.
Well, Kara, what do you think? How many charging stations will be needed? How much electricity? I know Ottawa's promising 880 million over the next couple of years to build something like 65,000 new charging stations. What do we need to meet this target?
Well, a couple of things. I think, look, of course, we need more infrastructure. I mean, that goes without saying, and it's been identified as a barrier for years. But I do want to remind folks that it's not really a barrier for about 80% of us who are short haul drivers, who are urban suburban commuters, who are going to plug in at home at night. And all the data actually in almost every country shows that most of us plug in at home at night. Now there's of course challenges in multi-unit and other things. It's not a breeze for everyone, but there's a very high proportion of us that there's no need to wait, where we're set up today, to do it. And on the larger vehicle, we're smaller. Little internet glitch there.
Yeah.
The early vehicles were smaller, but one of the things that we've found is for EVs, a lot of folks, the early adopters, they chose it as their second car. Many Canadian families have two cars. And so not every car needs to be a large family-sized car, even in a big family. And so, there's plenty of opportunity to advance even before the large cars are available. So those points, just to not discourage people to think, oh yeah, EVs are great in the future. For many, many Canadians, they're great right now. And I think they'll be even better in the future when we have better public infrastructure, larger vehicles, etc. But just there's a lot of good opportunity for many, many Canadians right now.
Well, what do you see the basket of clean vehicles looking like? Is it plug-in hybrids? Is it all electric? Is it fuel cell technology, three-road SUVs, trucks? We're seeing a lot of EV trucks. Brian, what's your take on that?
So over the next couple of years, we're going to see a range of EVs in every size imaginable, and this is all part of an effort to provide consumers with more options to effectively meet their daily driving needs. So, if you watch the Super Bowl, you will have seen a lot of advertisements for larger EVs that are coming into market, pickup trucks, for example, larger SUVs. And this really relates to Stephen's earlier point around demand. We've got to increase demand for these vehicles if we're going to get past the current 5% adoption rate that we see in Canada. So how do you do that? Yes, there are government policies that can help achieve that, but you ultimately have to have vehicles that appeal to a large swath of Canadians. Canadians like larger vehicles, they like SUVs, and they'll make decisions based on what fits into their lifestyle and what's convenient for them. So you're going to see a whole new range of vehicles available to Canadians, but we've got to make sure it's convenient, and that all comes back to the charging piece. Can these vehicles meet their daily driving needs in a way that doesn't divert significantly from what they're used to doing right now?
But we've had a lot of supply issues as well, not just with the semiconductor chip shortage, but this truck blockade at the Ambassador Bridge, 6 days blocked. What is going to happen with prices of EVs moving forward because of that impact and the supply of these vehicles?
Do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, this is where things like government incentives do come in, because we see survey after survey that show that Canadians are interested in EVs. But then when you dig down and ask them, would you pay more for an EV over an ICE vehicle? The reality is the majority say no. So they expect to get a vehicle that's going to suit their needs, be just as convenient, but it's got to be in the same price range. The reality is that EVs are more expensive. That will change over time, but the battery technology is expensive, and giving consumers access to a 300, 400, 500 kilometer range battery is pricey. So there's an existing price gap right now. Then you add to that challenges related to semiconductors. If we do have a serious and significant spike in demand for critical minerals as EV adoption increases, you're already seeing some of these mineral prices going up. So that could create some supply crunch. And then, yes, just last week we were dealing with some other self-inflicted supply chain woes, which aren't helpful for North American production overall. So there are a number of challenges, but this is why we need things like a consumer incentive, government incentives to help consumers make that switch while the price gap exists.
Stephen, do you agree with that?
No, actually, I don't. I think at the end of the day, sustainability isn't just about the environmental benefits of driving new technology into the marketplace. It's also about trying to get economic sustainability from your business model. So it's really important that we find a way that consumers will be able to purchase vehicles affordably, for themselves without assistance from government. And the reason I say that is that at the end of the day, the success of government incentive programs is also the seed of their failure. They become too expensive. And when they become too expensive, they're taken away and demand crashes. And we've seen that in Ontario and other jurisdictions where incentives have come and gone. So what we need to do from a manufacturing standpoint is to look at how to get reasonably priced competitive vehicles into the marketplace. And that means a range of different technologies for different consumers. And it also means, I think, supporting the sale of used vehicles into the marketplace, so that some people who are not in the in the new car market are able to gain access to those vehicles. In terms of how rapidly all of this is happening, I'd just say that at Toyota we've been at this since before anybody was actually talking about the need to drive down GHG emissions from vehicles. So if you think about Prius, for example, that goes back to the last century now, and we've been at it for the last couple of decades at driving electrified technology into the marketplace. So much so that there's a very rapid payback on hybrid technology. There is within your first financing period, in other words, that first 4 or 5 years, a payback on plug-in hybrids without the need for incentives from government. And we need to get battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles into that same sort of competitive range for the market to really truly be effective over the long haul. Incentives from government, they're a crutch for consumers and they're a crutch for industry, and we have to find different ways of handling this. Signals on energy pricing are part of it. Getting vehicles that are right sized for people's needs is another piece of it. If you're driving an EV monster truck with a 200 kilowatt hour battery in it, it is not going to be cheap. But if you have a small city vehicle, we can certainly make them affordable. But current regulations in Canada don't support those vehicles. So there are a host of things that we have to do in order to get there. But I'm not a big fan of using our tax dollars to persuade us to buy more vehicles. I don't think that's the right long-term strategy.
But you can't deny, though, in provinces that have provincial incentives, Quebec and BC, we're certainly seeing more come on board. This is where people are buying most of these EVs. So, Kara, do you agree? Do we need incentives to move more in the short term, at least?
I think we do. I think we're in a climate emergency, and I think in a perfect world, I agree with Stephen. We should not have to have incentives, but if we want this to happen faster than the natural course of business, then we must do it. And I think you're paying for the emission reductions. I mean, that's what that money does. And by the way, we have subsidized oil for 30 years and more. And so to subsidize EVs is really nothing different. It's just that the money goes to you and me rather than to a big organization. And I personally think that I agree with Stephen in some aspect that we don't necessarily want it forever. You do the total cost of ownership. EVs are actually affordable now. It's just you have to pay now to save later. And not everyone does that math. We have a great tool on our website that will do the math for you, but you have to know to go to the tool and do it. But we can show that like a sort of a Bolt size EV is more affordable than a Honda Civic today over time. It's just that upfront price does deter some people, and we do need to help them with that upfront price. So I would argue, my personal view is something that I would call a declining incentive, which gets around what Stephen's concern is, that it's going to get yanked, but provides the incentive to hurry up and do it. So yes, for example, have it 6,000 this year and 4,000 the following year and 2,000 the year after and 0 the year after. And you show to the consumer, A, it pays to do it quickly. B, it's not going to last forever. And I think that's a kind of model that would accelerate adoption, not sort of hold on to incentives forever, work for government, work for people.
Shiv, I'll get you to weigh in on too, because we haven't heard from you.
Sure. So actually one thing, and maybe it's a slightly different thought, I think what will happen by 2030 is it'll be the first time where there's going to be a wide range of different vehicle propulsion types, including hybrid, pure EV, the traditional diesel gas models. And I think that's a different world than what we're used to. To think that there'll ever be a pure transition and everything on the road today becomes EV, I think is unrealistic. So just understanding that and thinking through that. And this has never happened in history. Always we've had, predominantly gas-powered vehicles with diesel. More recently, hybrid has come into the mix in terms of volume and electric. So it's going to be interesting to see this transition, the choice. And I think as some people get EVs and they're in social settings and people are getting more familiar and hearing about it, it'll also help push some of these decisions. So I think all of these things will help. both the incentives, but also just the cultural adoption, the EV infrastructure. I think there's got to be a number of things that happen at the same time for us to make this transition. And I think the good thing is that we're moving in the right direction. So I'm quite positive and hopeful about that future.
And Stephen, what do you think of Kara's suggestion? I kind of like that suggestion of the incentives that dwindle down.
So it's a bit of a cancer, is what it is. So it says that if you buy your vehicle later in the process, it's going to be worth less because the incentives that were put on the first models are driving down used car prices. It's a strange model, and it's why you want to be very, very careful about market intervention of any sort. And frankly, Kara was talking about the incentives that go to the oil industry, and I'm not here to defend the oil industry, but it's a little rich to suggest that they're the only part of the energy sector that has received subsidies from government. The electricity sector has received massive transfers of wealth as well. So as we go forward, here's what I anticipate is going to happen: is that energy costs are going to level off, and they're going to level off because governments need to get the revenues that come both from the vehicles on the road and the energy that's sold to power them. So we're in an unusual situation right now. We're seeing this massive explosion of different types of technology. We're seeing an energy market that's in transition. We're seeing consumers, looking for different things in their vehicles. And I think the great part about this, and the one thing that we probably would all agree on, is that it's one of those rare moments when there's a wealth of choice and an opportunity for people to do the right thing. I would just say that our philosophy about this is that you want to have a lot of diversity in the marketplace. And the reason you want that is so that you don't become overly dependent on a single energy source, and so that you're able to meet the diverse needs of those consumers, not all of whom live in suburban homes with relatively short commute distances or a place to charge in their driveway. Some of whom need vehicles for work purposes. Some of whom have vehicles that are going into heavy-duty use cycles, like taxis or ride-hailing or courier services. So every one of those uses needs a different type of technology. And if we let the marketplace decide, then I think you're going to get the best and most competitive result. What we should be doing, rather than talking about zero emission policies in this country, is talking about GHG reduction. And if we got our policies properly aligned, then you'd have the right technologies in the hands of the right people.
Kara, did I hear you at some point disagree?
No, actually, sorry. I had to tell my dog to go away, so I just was telling you.
Oh, that's like the live webinars that we're used to that
working
now.
From home.
I'm going to just actually. Sorry?
Just working from home like everybody else.
I want to get to some audience questions because they are actually flowing in like you would not believe. Shiva, I have one for you as far as how quickly is EV technology changing? Should I wait for the technology to mature or perfect before investing?
A lot of innovation around EVs actually pushed into software. If you think about it, like at its core, we're talking about a battery and a motor. There's not much there except for maybe battery capacity and cost of battery that will improve over time. So the energy density. But so from that perspective, I don't think the physical platform will evolve significantly. I'm sure there'll be iterations from each manufacturer that will get better over time. But I think there'll be slight relative to software upgrades. So I would see like buying a vehicle today being just as good as into the future because it will update over time and have some of that feature set. And I think that's an important consideration. It's very different than the old model where you get the vehicle and then it's hands off from the manufacturer completely. And so it's kind of up to you to keep it well maintained. In this case, it's going to consistently be um, in a good state, hopefully, over time. And I think that's going to be different. And I think it'll affect the resale value as well. As we think about the lane assist and ADAS features that come with these vehicles, if they're able to evolve fast enough, it could actually render the vehicles as an asset rather than just a cost. But those are a lot more future thinking concepts. But yeah, that's my thought around EVs, and I think it is a good time to buy now if you have the money for some of these vehicles, which are a little bit more expensive.
And when it comes to the used EV market, because the technology is so changing so quickly, how far back should a consumer go? Karen, do you want to try tackling that one? Is a 2017 model, 2018 model worthwhile buying used?
I think somewhat following along what I think both Brian and Stephen said is, there's different types of drivers with different types of needs. And there could be city drivers that really 2012 Leaf would suit perfectly well. It only has 120 kilometers of range, but maybe you're the kind of driver that's all you need. But what I do tell a lot of, we have a used EV rebate running. So we talk to a lot of folks buying a used EV and longevity of their battery. The longevity of the battery and whether, if they're coming up close to the end of the warranty. So I usually recommend to folks, hey, if that's a concern you have, make sure you're, within the 8-year window of the warranty so that if, so buy a 6-year-old car, for example, then you got a couple of years left on the warranty so that if there should be a problem, you're probably going to be covered. And so again, it just really depends on your use case. For most Canadians, they say 80% of us drive 50 kilometers or less a day. I mean, that's what the stats say. I know there's lots of individuals who drive more, but most of us can get by on a pretty short range vehicle most of the time. And for that odd time where you're taking a big long trip, rent a car, take the train, or use the other car, the gas car. We swap with our friends, swap for a minivan and let them drive our EV for a weekend.
Is it reasonable to have incentives for USA-made EVs while the USA are adopting protectionist policy? Brian, this seems to be right up your alley.
Sure. Yeah. On that question, look, we don't know what the outcome of the Build Back Better incentive will be. Obviously, there was a lot of energy behind it pre-Christmas, really, where there was a proposal for a $12,500 U.S. incentive for U.S. built vehicles. There's a great deal of uncertainty around that right now. We simply don't know what a final incentive will look like. So I'm not going to speculate on what should the response be. But at a very minimum, if the U.S. puts an incentive of that size into the market, that's over $15,000 Canadian. Canada's got to be prepared to have and scale up its incentive to be equivalent to what the U.S. is doing. That will be a big driver of demand in the United States, and if we want to keep pace with the American market, we've got to be prepared to do the same. So keep a close eye on it, and we'll see what happens over the coming months and whether or not that advances.
And we have another question. How many EVs do you think Canada will manufacture in 2030? We're seeing certainly Ontario emerging as a hotspot for new vehicles.
Sure, I can take a crack at that. We've seen
Sure.
some really, really encouraging announcements from Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis over the past 2 years. $6 billion in new investment into Canada. $4 billion of that is dedicated to EV assembly. So I'm really encouraged by the foothold that we have in this transition underway. Automakers overall are investing approximately $500 billion US into electrification through 2025. I mean, these are massive, massive investments. So I think we've got a good chance here. The Ontario government has come out with a focused policy, Driving Prosperity 2, aimed at attracting more EV manufacturing. So I'm not going to venture a guess at the number of vehicles we will be building in 2030, but I can say that we're off to a good start here, and I'm hopeful that we'll see a number of assembly operations building EVs.
Kara, do you have any insight?
Well, the Ford government here in Ontario did make a statement saying they were shooting for 400,000 vehicles in 2030, I believe. But I would venture a guess that if all the plans currently on the books for GM, Ford, and Stellantis all actually materialize, it would be more than that.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to go back to Brian for another audience question. Do CAFE, the corporate average fuel economy standards, need to be revisited to help assist consumers make the switch to lighter and more material-wise EVs?
It's a great question. So what we see in Canada is our light-duty vehicle emission standards are aligned with the US EPA. That's been a long-standing agreement and tradition that we've had aligning those standards. And those standards ultimately are what are driving and will drive electrification. If you look at what the US EPA is doing, they've committed to getting to 50% EVs of new vehicle sales by 2030. And they're doing that through the emission standards. So they're tightening the standards, which leaves really one pathway, which is electrification. So so I guess in short, the answer is that yes, those emission standards are a powerful driver of EV adoption.
Okay, we have Stephen back. We missed you there briefly. I was talking to no one. We have an audience question for you. We're glad you're back.
So
can you deal with the issue of batteries? We hear there is not enough of the metals and minerals required to make them. What about recycling as well?
Okay, so a couple of things. That was not a clever strategy on my part to try to avoid answering the question. But no, in terms of batteries, there's a lot of conversation about rare earth, which is not particularly rare. It's just often in inconvenient places and not controlled by people who are friendly to the needs of the North American marketplace. So it's going to take some time for the supplies of key minerals to catch up with the burgeoning demand right now for those same minerals. And one of the things that we saw last year for the first time in a number of years is the cost of batteries actually increasing. So those are some issues we're going to have to deal with, is how to scale up the supply chain to be able to meet the types of requirements we have. The second piece of this that I think your questioners raised is the comment of recycling. I would say that the first thing that you have to look at is upcycling of batteries. In other words, after they've ceased to have a useful life in cars, there's still lots of life left in those battery packs for use in other applications. In the case of Toyota, with the BZ4X that we're bringing out this year, that battery will have 90% of its usable life after 10 years in the car. So it's a remarkably robust system, and that's before we move on to new battery chemistries and structures that are going to be coming in the next decade. So I'm not terribly concerned about the recycling issue right now. That having been said, it takes a lot of energy if you want to recycle today, and a lot of research is going into the process of making that recycling and recovery more energy efficient and in itself lower carbon. But obviously, to the extent that we can recover batteries and recycle materials, then there's raw material to go into your next batteries as well.
I have another audience question. I am the owner of an EV and see that dealers are struggling to keep up with EV technology, both on the technician front and equipment fronts. In other words, there are few places to have EV glitches fixed. Is the auto industry addressing this? Who would like to take a stab at that?
Maybe I can come back at that. Just very quickly. Obviously, we've been in the market with electrified technology since the beginning of the century, and every one of our dealerships was required to have recycling programs in place, but also training and tools and equipment to be able to handle those vehicles. So if you're looking at a Toyota, the answer is that no one will sell it if they can't service it and support it, because that's part of the commitment we put behind it. And I think other car companies will be doing the same. If you're talking about the local corner garage, well, frankly, given the price of technology moving forward, they're going to have to become more specialized, and it's it will take them time to get to a point where they're capable of handling those requirements. But there are lots of enterprising people out there, and capabilities are expanding all the time.
Kara, I think
I
you
can,
had something that you wanted to add.
I'll add something if that's okay.
Mhm.
So our experience has been, when the folks have cars on the lot, they actually can be quite good about talking about EVs. They will do what they can to sell them. What we have found, though, is, of course, if you don't have it on the lot, there tends to be an inclination, not to talk about it. And that's understandable. Their job is to sell a vehicle. But what we are seeing is often, because the consumer has done a lot of research before they go to the dealership, they often do know more than the dealer, and that can sometimes, and no fault of their own, because often there's a lot of turnover in that job. So the automakers, the OEMs, do a lot of training of their folks in the dealership to keep them up to speed on the EV technology. But unfortunately, a lot of those people don't last there that long. That job does go through a lot of people. We've seen the stats, like there's a good chunk of people that leave in 6 months to a year. So it's a real challenge for the automakers to keep those folks up to speed. And I know they're doing a lot of work on that, but there's more to be done there, because certainly you're going to sell EVs, you need to really understand them. The second thing is that they tend to be really knowledgeable on the tech features of the car, all the, what kind of motor, how fast it is off the line, all the technical details. But what they tend not to know is, well, how much money am I going to save? How much emissions am I going to reduce? Some of the things that, like, a new EV owner really wants to know. And this is an area I think where we could really make improvement.
And I'm going to try to squeeze in one more final question, because the audience questions are great. Speaking of used vehicles, is there any data on the average cost per kilometer, repairs and maintenance for the vehicles that are out of warranty? That might be you, Kara, again, since you know that market.
I don't know price per kilometer. Unfortunately, I don't have that information. We have heard from Yolanda that used prices have gone up, which is true for EVs as well. Although maybe not quite as much. We're finding the supply is decent still for a used EV. Not every brand, but for some brands. So, check out Auto Trader and Kijiji. There's lots there. Our experience on the used EV is the average price that is coming through the rebate. That's all I can tell you. We've given the rebate to about 1,600 Ontarians. And the average price for that program is around $24,000.
Wow. Oh, this is great. We could go on and on. I think we could take the whole afternoon slot with all the questions that are coming in, and we didn't even get to everything that we could have today. This is great. I want to thank our audience members, and of course, I want to thank our panelists, Stephen, Kara, Brian, and Shiva. That was a really riveting discussion. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then meet back here at 1:40, and you do not want to miss our next guest. This is a one-on-one interview with a Canadian pioneer in self-driving technology. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.